From an attempted murder in the middle of a MotoGP race, to a rider literally delivering pizza after the podium. These are the most unbelievable MotoGP moments that look completely fake, but actually happened. During a race, Andrea Iannone was charging down the straight at over 300 kilometers per hour, when out of nowhere, a seagull flew directly into his path. The bird slammed straight into his helmet at full speed. At those speeds, even something as small as a bird can cause a massive crash. But somehow, Iannone kept the bike under control and carried on as if nothing had happened. Considering this was the same rider nicknamed Maniac Joe, the man famous for pulling off fearless overtakes, including passing both Marc Marquez and Valentino Rossi in a single move, it almost feels fitting that even nature couldn't slow him down. But speaking of riders who simply refuse to give up, nobody does it quite like Marc Marquez. At the 2020 Spanish Grand Prix, Marquez suffered one of the worst crashes of his career, fracturing the upper bone in his right arm. For almost every rider, that's a season-ending injury. For Marquez, it was just another obstacle. Only a few days after surgery, he was already back on the grid for the Andalusian Grand Prix. Doctors couldn't believe it, fans couldn't believe it, and whether you call it courage or pure stubbornness, it became one of the most iconic comebacks MotoGP has ever seen. Then came a save that looked like it completely ignored the laws of physics. Ivan Silva's bike snapped violently beneath him. 1 second he was being thrown off. The next, he somehow pulled himself back onto the seat. Every time it looked like the crash was finally inevitable, Silva somehow found another impossible save. The crowd could hardly believe what they were watching. Unfortunately, his luck didn't last forever, and he eventually crashed the following day. Sometimes, even the best saves have an expiration date. But Nicolas Terol faced an even tougher decision. As he approached the finish line, his bike suddenly stepped out beneath him. Normally you'd let the bike go, but there was one problem. The concrete wall was only meters away. If he bailed out, he knew exactly where he was heading. So instead, he fought the bike with everything he had. Somehow, he stayed upright, crossed the finish line while practically knee-sliding across the track, and avoided what could have been a very serious injury. Here's something you definitely don't expect to see after a MotoGP podium. Most riders celebrate with champagne. Pedro Acosta? He delivered pizza. After losing a bet, Acosta actually showed up in full racing gear and personally delivered pizzas to the winning team, probably the fastest pizza delivery driver on earth. And finally, Johann Zarco proved that racers don't quit, even when their motorcycles do. At Misano, his Yamaha ran out of power on the final straight. The race was over. Or at least, it should have been. Instead of giving up, Zarco jumped off the bike and started pushing it toward the finish line with everything he had. Because sometimes, finishing the race matters more than how you get there. Somehow, Johann Zarco actually made it to the finish line. By pushing his dead Yamaha across the line, he earned a single championship point. 1 point. After all that. Sometimes determination is worth more than horsepower. But Zarco wasn't the only rider whose bike completely turned against him. At the 2020 Styrian Grand Prix, Maverick Viñales suddenly realized something every rider fears. His brakes had failed. Heading toward one of the fastest corners on the circuit, with no way to slow down, he had only one option. He jumped off the bike. The unmanned Yamaha continued flying through the gravel before smashing violently into the barriers. It was a terrifying reminder that, in MotoGP, sometimes the machine becomes just as dangerous as the speed. But what happened next wasn't an accident. It was a choice. And one that shocked the entire racing world. Romano Fenati was already known for losing his temper. Back in 2016, he even kicked another rider during a race. But 2 years later, at the 2018 San Marino Grand Prix, he crossed a line that should never be crossed. While racing at around 125 miles per hour, Fenati reached over and squeezed Stefano Manzi's front brake lever. At that speed, it could have ended in disaster. The backlash was immediate. Fenati was disqualified from the race, suspended for 2 rounds, fired by his team, lost major sponsorships, and even had his racing license withdrawn. In a sport built on trust, one reckless decision nearly destroyed an entire career. But if one rider created chaos, the 2018 Argentine Grand Prix managed to confuse the entire grid. The race started with wet conditions, so almost everyone chose rain tires. Everyone, except Jack Miller. He gambled on slick tires. Then, just minutes before the start, the rain stopped. Suddenly, every other rider rushed back to the pits to swap bikes. The start had to be delayed. The grid was reorganized. And when everyone lined up again, Jack Miller was sitting completely alone on pole position, while the rest of the field formed up several rows behind him. One weather gamble created one of the strangest starting grids MotoGP has ever seen, but the madness was only getting started. Before the race even began, Marc Marquez stalled his bike on the grid. Instead of waiting, he bump-started it by riding the wrong way down the grid to reclaim his original position. Race control wasn't impressed. He received a ride-through penalty. Then, during the race, things went from bad to worse. Marquez made aggressive moves through the field, including a controversial collision with Valentino Rossi that sent Rossi crashing out. At the finish, Marquez had crossed the line in 5th place, but after multiple penalties, he was dropped completely out of the points. And somehow, the next moment looks even less believable. At the 2020 British Grand Prix, Fabio Quartararo crashed, then somehow rode directly over his own motorcycle. For a split second, it looked like something straight out of a video game. Thankfully, he walked away without serious injuries. But now, let's slow things down for a moment, because not every unforgettable MotoGP moment ends with relief. Some leave behind a silence that the sport never truly recovers from. Marco Simoncelli wasn't just another rider, he was one of MotoGP's brightest young stars. A former 250cc world champion, with fearless talent, huge personality, and a future that looked limitless. Then came October 2011, the Malaysian Grand Prix at Sepang. On just the second lap, Simoncelli lost the front of his bike entering turn 11. What happened over the next few seconds changed MotoGP forever. At first, it looked like an ordinary low-side crash, the kind MotoGP riders walk away from all the time, but within seconds, everything changed. As Marco Simoncelli slid across the circuit, his bike pulled him back into the racing line, directly into the path of Colin Edwards and Valentino Rossi. Neither rider had anywhere to go. The impact was devastating. Simoncelli's helmet was torn from his head, and race officials immediately waved the red flag. The entire circuit fell silent. Medical teams reached him within moments and fought desperately to save his life. CPR continued for more than 45 minutes, but despite every effort, Marco Simoncelli passed away from his injuries. He was just 24 years old. The loss shook the entire motorsport world. After the tragedy, MotoGP strengthened helmet retention regulations, reviewed multiple safety procedures, and retired Simoncelli's iconic number 58 from Grand Prix racing. He was later inducted into the MotoGP Hall of Fame. But more importantly, he remains one of the sport's most loved and unforgettable riders. As thousands of fans gathered to pay tribute, one message echoed across the racing world: Marco, we'll never forget you. For Valentino Rossi, that day left scars that would never fully disappear. And 9 years later, fate came frighteningly close once again. The 2020 Austrian Grand Prix, the Red Bull Ring. The riders were approaching turn 3 at nearly 200 miles per hour when Franco Morbidelli's Yamaha made contact with Johann Zarco's Ducati. The crash itself was violent, but what happened next is still one of the most terrifying moments MotoGP has ever witnessed. Morbidelli's motorcycle was launched high into the air, flipping violently across the circuit. Behind the crash, Valentino Rossi and Maverick Viñales were arriving at full speed. Rossi had just begun turning into the corner when Morbidelli's bike flew directly over the front of his Yamaha. It missed his helmet by only a few centimeters, a fraction of a second earlier, and the outcome could have been unimaginably different. Back in the garage, Rossi could barely process what had happened. The shock on his face said everything. Considering what he had already experienced with the loss of Marco Simoncelli, this near miss carried an even deeper emotional weight. Somehow, every rider involved walked away without serious injuries. In a sport where milliseconds decide everything, that day, those same milliseconds saved lives. And just when you think MotoGP has seen it all, the next moments prove that sometimes the biggest danger on the racetrack doesn't even have two wheels. But not every unforgettable MotoGP moment is about crashes. Sometimes, the biggest interruption to a race has absolutely nothing to do with motorcycles. Take the Circuit of the Americas. During a practice session, officials suddenly threw a red flag. Not because of rain, not because of an accident, but because a yellow Labrador had somehow wandered onto the circuit. For nearly 30 minutes, marshals chased the confused dog around the track, while riders waited in the pits. Probably every pet owner's worst nightmare, and one of the most random red flags MotoGP has ever seen. Then there's Phillip Island. If you've watched racing there before, you already know the local wildlife likes to make surprise appearances. But during one Grand Prix weekend, things got even crazier. a wild wallaby suddenly hopped onto the track during practice. Motorcycles were blasting past at race speed, and Alex Espargaro came within inches of hitting it. Thankfully, both rider and animal escaped unharmed. Sometimes luck is the fastest thing on the circuit. And speaking of unexpected moments, Valentino Rossi once celebrated a podium in a way only Rossi could. Instead of the usual champagne celebration, only Rossi could turn a podium celebration into pure entertainment. But if we're talking about unbelievable performances, Brad Binder delivered one that still feels impossible. At the 2016 German Grand Prix at the Sachsenring, Binder didn't start from pole. He didn't even start in the middle of the grid. He started 35th, dead last. In a category where races are often decided by mere tenths of a second, climbing through the entire field sounds impossible. Yet lap after lap, he kept overtaking. One rider, then another, until somehow, the rider who started last was leading the race. When the checkered flag finally waved, Brad Binder had completed one of the greatest comeback victories motorcycle racing has ever seen. From 35th to 1st. That's not just rare, that's the kind of story people would call unrealistic if it happened in a movie. But MotoGP wasn't finished creating unforgettable moments. During the 2021 Catalan Grand Prix, Fabio Quartararo suffered one of the strangest mechanical problems imaginable. His racing suit suddenly came undone while he was still battling at full speed. With his airbag activated and his leathers partially open, he was forced to remove his chest protector during the race, just to stay in control. He still crossed the finish line near the front, but because he failed to finish with the required safety equipment, he received another time penalty. Just like that, a brilliant ride turned into a frustrating result. Sometimes your biggest rival isn't another rider, it's your own equipment. And if that wasn't awkward enough, what happened to Alex Espargaro at the 2022 Catalan Grand Prix was even harder to believe. Racing in front of his home crowd, with a podium almost secured, he made one small mistake that nobody saw coming. Alex Espargaro was racing at his home Grand Prix. A podium was within reach, the championship fight was still alive, and with only one lap remaining, second place looked secure. Then, he made a mistake that still haunts MotoGP fans. As he came down the main straight, Espargaro looked up at the display, saw the lap counter, and mistakenly believed the race was over. So he celebrated. He raised his hand. He eased off the throttle. The only problem, there was still one full lap left. Within seconds, rider after rider blasted past him. By the time he realized what had happened, it was far too late. Instead of finishing second, he crossed the line in 5th. No crash, no mechanical failure, just one tiny misunderstanding that cost him a massive result. It's one of the most painful mistakes ever seen in MotoGP. But the next moment wasn't painful, it was legendary. What happens when two of the greatest racers on the planet swap machines? Valentino Rossi climbed into a Formula One car. Lewis Hamilton jumped onto a MotoGP bike. Most people expected it to be nothing more than a fun publicity event. Instead, both legends looked surprisingly comfortable in each other's world. Rossi proved he had the talent to handle Formula One. Hamilton showed he could tame a MotoGP machine. It was a once-in-a-lifetime crossover between two motorsport icons. And speaking of Valentino Rossi, somehow he always seemed to be at the center of MotoGP's greatest moments. Whether it was unforgettable victories, wild celebrations, or legendary rivalries, and none was bigger than his battle with teammate Jorge Lorenzo. They shared the same garage, the same motorcycle, but they wanted the exact same thing, to be number one. Their rivalry reached one of its greatest chapters at the 2009 Catalan Grand Prix. After an entire race separated by almost nothing, it all came down to one final lap. Lorenzo attacked into turn 1. Rossi fought straight back. Corner after corner, they traded positions like two riders refusing to blink. Every overtake was answered immediately. Every braking zone became another battle. By the final corner, it looked like Lorenzo had done enough, but Rossi saw a gap that almost didn't exist. He threw his Yamaha up the inside, made the pass stick, and crossed the finish line just fractions of a second ahead. It wasn't just an overtake, it became one of the greatest final laps in MotoGP history, a reminder of why Valentino Rossi and Jorge Lorenzo will forever be remembered as two of the sport's greatest rivals. And that's a wrap. If you enjoyed these unbelievable MotoGP moments, let me know in the comments which one was your favorite. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.